What's up, YouTube? So tonight, really, I wanted to address a issue with you guys. It's not an issue, but it's a topic that I think is pretty important to me. If you hear a little bit of sniffing and scratching around, my dog Lily is in the room right now with me as I film this. She's checking out the new gun room, and I wanted to address this because we have deer season coming up in about 12 days, and I'm going to be doing some hunting and some filming for you guys, and I just wanted to kind of address this because it's a big thing that I've been seeing in the hunting community. I'm new to the community. I'm new to hunting. I've only been doing this for about 3 years. It's my fourth season ever, and I started archery hunting about two years ago, and I've killed deer in all seasons with rifles, muzzle loaders, and archery equipment. Used bow, compound bow, and the crossbow. And so I just want to talk to you guys a little bit about this. And there's a lot of hate that goes towards crossbow usage in the archery season. I think that's kind of unwarranted. And I use both setups. I'm comfortable with both setups, but I want to talk to you guys primarily about why you're gonna be seeing me use a crossbow. And I'm a capable-bodied young man who has a compound bow and has used it a lot before and killed deer with it. So why am I gonna use a crossbow this season primarily? Is kind of the question I wanted to answer before we even get into the season. And so to that point, let's go ahead and just get right into it. This, first off, is a diamond archery compound bow. It's not the most expensive in the world. It's not the cheapest one either, but it's a good compound bow. And I've got my 20, 30, and 40 yard pins. It's got a 72-pound draw weight. I shoot 29.5-inch arrows out of it, or that's my draw length. I do pretty heavy arrow setup. And that's by the advising of the archery shop that I went to. I have 100 grain inserts, 125 grain broadheads, iron wills. I put a lot of money at the end of that arrow, and they served me wonderfully. They've gotten pass-through shots on deer. Also have an Annihilator broadhead that I've run on this setup that works quite well. It's actually what killed Ralph there. He's a small buck, so I know that doesn't mean much to anybody, but it means a lot to me because he was my first archery deer. And anyways, so compound bow, it's a good setup. I like it. I've shot hogs with it, shot deer with it, and it's good. It's a good bow. Crossbow. This is a Wicked Ridge 10-point crossbow. I think it's their, it tells me right there, it's their Blackhawk XT version. It's not their most expensive brand. It's not the most expensive crossbow out there either. What I like about it mostly, other than the power it generates and the scope, is these hooks for the to draw the string out are built into the stock, which is nice. Instead of you going out there with a secondary drawstring that you kind of have to remember or not remember to bring. It's already built into the stock, so that's kind of one less thing to keep track of. Out of those, I shoot, I want to say it's 20-inch bolts. It might be 22-inch bolts. I'm shooting, I was shooting last year the Annihilator broadheads out of them, and that smoked a doe. But I wanted to try something out a little bit different. I wanted to see what mechanicals are like and kind of play around with that. I did some ballistic videos for you guys, just kind of checking them out. I think we found a really good one with the Bloodsport broadheads, because they're kind of cut on contact, but they also have the mechanicals, so it's kind of a hybrid. So that's pretty cool. So that's the setups. The reason I'm going to be using a crossbow this season, I'll just tell you guys that right out, is I'm in grad school. We just moved. I got 2 labs that are 8 months old now, and they're slowly starting to learn to be duck dogs. Really, they're just learning to be dogs, but they're getting there. And I've got a wife and a lot of schoolwork and a part-time job, life is busy, and the drive to go hunt is 2 hours for me, and it's regardless of what state I'm going to hunt in. I'm hunting 3 different states. I'm going to try and film a bunch of it, but the time I have to spare is very, very limited, and it's very sporadic, and I want to devote that time to hunting, and so I don't have the time to do practice. I live in an apartment now, which really hurts as far as being able to just walk out your back door and shoot the bow, and just being able to go and practice is not on the table really anymore, and that sucks. And I don't think it's ethical or smart to hunt with a compound bow and not be getting constant reps in practice-wise, because the difference between these two is incredible, right? And that's the argument of a lot of people who bash the crossbow, which is it has a stock, it has a scope, it has a trigger. The compound bow's got a lot going for it to make it very accurate, but the peep sight pin system isn't the most accurate, right? It's kind of like shooting a rifle with iron sights. It's marginally accurate. It can be incredibly accurate. It really kind of depends on how much you're practicing and how familiar you are with that particular weapon system and that particular setup. And I find it to be that if you're going to hunt with a compound bow, the responsible thing to do is to practice a lot before the season starts. If you can't do that, I think using a crossbow is fine. Now, this gets into, everybody says that it's not ethical to hunt with a crossbow, or that it's not fair chase. And I think those two things get tied up together a lot. A very brief overlay of what the two things really mean, dictionary definition wise, is that fair chase is everything that happens leading up to you taking the shot. Efficacy is everything that happens after you pull the trigger or hit your release. And so when it comes to when it comes to efficacy, let's start with there. The crossbow is more ethical. Crossbow is more ethical for everybody, for every single human being. Compound bow is less accurate than the scope, stock, trigger crossbow, right? It's less accurate, right? It generates less force. It is less accurate. It is less deadly. It has less pass-throughs. It allows for more margin of error. Guys more often get gut shots and don't recover deer when they use compound bows than they do when they use crossbows. Right, it's just that's the deal, right? If I don't practice with my compound bow at all, ever, and then I take 3 practice shots and then go out into the stand to start the season, is a real possibility that I'm going to gut shot that deer at 20 yards, even though it's only 20 yards and I've shot compound bow my whole life. Oh, I'm so special. If you don't practice, and then you create a higher likelihood of error, and you're not the one who pays that price, right? It's the animal that you're hunting that pays that price. So if you're not going to put in the reps and the work to make the compound bow ethical, it, as it stands alone, is not as ethical as the crossbow, right? The crossbow, standalone, has a lot more going for it as far as efficacy goes. Shot placement is going to be more accurate, pass through more likely, damage and foot-pound pressure transferred greater, all those things with the crossbow. So this is more deadly. Fair chase, that is the argument of the century for compound bow hunters. Fair chase is one, it's the eye of the beholder. So it's a little bit up to how you choose to do things. I would argue that the main argument is that crossbows can shoot a lot farther than compounds, right? I mean, there's crossbows that get out to 100 yards these days, and that basically the argument is you can go out with a crossbow, you can shoot way farther than you can with a compound bow, and therefore it's not as fair chase. It's easier for a guy with a crossbow during archery season to kill deer than it is with a guy with a compound bow. And I get that. And God forbid you have a stick bow, you're shooting recurve, or long bow, you have us all be in challenges. But the crossbow is only not fair chase if you use it in that capacity. I find it to be rather irresponsible to do so. I find it rather unethical. There's Lily. If you're going to take a 100-yard shot with a crossbow, even though the crossbows are more powerful, that flight time is 2-3 seconds. How long does it take a deer to take a couple more steps forward or backward or to the side and you to bury one in its guts? I mean, and same thing with compound bows. There's guys that shoot out way too far with a compound bow. In my opinion, it's just an opinion. I think when you start talking about distance, especially with archery equipment, but you can even do it with rifles, that hang time of the projectile definitely has a lot to do with efficacy and whether or not the animal's going to move in between when you take that shot. I mean, deer jump a stream all the time, crossbow's pretty loud, and you're shooting at 100 yards, that's definitely unethical with either one of these weapons. For me, I find it that if you're hunting within 40 yards regardless, I think that's a good standard. I think with a compound bow or with a crossbow, that's pretty much my maximum about where I would go, is about 40-yard shot, and that's pushing it. That's definitely pushing it with a compound bow. It's definitely pushing it with a crossbow. I know people can make much farther shots, but I practice at 50 with both of these, and I think 40 is a very realistic and ethical place to be. And if you're hunting at 40 yards, this is basically the same thing, right? The challenge, the fair chase aspect of this is getting within 40 yards of the deer. That's the whole thing. After it gets within 40 yards and you get that broadside or that slightly quartering away shot, if you've practiced a lot and you're accurate with this, or if you weren't able to practice as much but you have this, your shot is going to be an ethical and fair chase shot, right? If it's farther away, it's probably not ethical. And then how you got into that 40-yard range is the question of fair chase. I think, who is more, who's practicing better fair chase? The guy who, watches a deer bed down and then spends a couple hours, creeping through the woods on his hands and knees to get within 30 yards of the deer, and then takes a shot in between two trees and catches the deer as it's bedded down in the heart. That's a pretty big challenge, right? That 30-yard shot with a compound bow or a crossbow doesn't really matter. That's not the impressive part, and that wasn't the fair chase part, right? If he does it with a crossbow, it's just as impressive to me as if he had done it with a compound bow, because that 30-yard shot isn't the hard part about that. Getting that close to the deer, that was the challenge. Versus if you're sitting over a bait pile that you got marked off at exactly 20 yards, and you're in a tree stand that you boxed in with all this coverage and everything else, so you can go full draw with your compound bow and the animal not even see the movement, and you come up and you pop them at 20 yards. I mean, I'm not bashing that. I hunt over a bait pile in 2 different states. I hunt over bait piles or feeders. But, not as much fair chase as the other one, right? It's not as much of a challenge. It's not as difficult. I think a lot of compound bow hunters get on here and they kind of tout this superiority complex of, I do this and it's so difficult, and pulling back this bow, and you get 95% let off. I mean, a child would hold that bow at full draw. That's not the challenge, and it's not the challenge with the crossbow. It's not the challenge with the rifles. The challenge is the way that you choose to chase the animals and the way you choose to operate in it. To me, I think if you're going to hunt the archery season because you want to hunt and you really feel the passion to go and hunt, and you want to put all that time and practice and energy into a compound bow, and you have that time and those resources, do it. That's badass. If you don't have that time because you work a full-time job and you got kids and all these responsibilities, and you work 6 days a week, and you just don't, it's hunting or the practice. It's not both, and if you got to make that type of choice, then get a crossbow. use a crossbow. Be happy with that crossbow, and you know, make sure you still practice with it. Make sure you still know how that bolt drops. You know, a crossbow is not a guaranteed kill. It's not, you know, the holy grail of archery season. It's got its own challenges. Yeah, it's very frustrating. You know, coming into this, coming into hunting world so late, and as a newcomer, it's interesting to kind of come in and be like, oh wow, there's elitism, you know, the guys who have the time and the money to, you know, use compound bows think they're the shit compared to guys who don't have that time and use a crossbow. And I get it. There's a bad rap for a guy who, you know, buys the $3,000 crossbow that finds the ballistic coefficient for him, and then he's got the death grip tripod. I got one. I use it for hog hunting all the time with my rifles and everything else. You know, he gets the $3,000 crossbow, and it makes all the decisions for him. And then, you know, he's got the bipod or tripod and everything, and he just kind of like doop, and he kills a monster buck out in Illinois or something like that. And compound bow hunters look at that and they're like, that's just not fair. I get that, but that is not your average guy who's using the crossbow. The average guy who's using the crossbow, especially in today's climate with everybody, you know, screaming that, you know, anybody who doesn't use a compound bow is, you know, a bitch. He's doing it because he needs to find a way to continue hunting, but doesn't have the time and the facility to use a compound bow. You know, it's not fair that the guy who lives in an apartment versus the guy who has a little bit of land and a farm to set up his own archery range. You know, the guy who lives in an apartment should still be able to hunt archery season. And, you know, if you want to put limitations on that because you want to be a good, solid, ethical hunter, fine, right? Maybe if, instead of making the challenge, I'm going to use a compound bow or I'm going to use a stick bow, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're not accurate with this, you're not the one who loses out. The deer with the arrow in his stomach, that's the one that loses on that bet, right? If you want to make this more challenging, set distance standards and be like, I'm not going to shoot a deer if I can't get within 20 yards of it, if I can't get within 10 yards of it, if I can't reach out and touch it almost, you know? If those are the challenges you want to set, do it. That's the hard part, right? You have a responsibility as the hunter that when you decide to shoot that animal, you are going to make a clean and quick kill. And if you are not confident that you can do that with this, use this. If you're not confident you can do it with either, use a rifle. If you're not confident you can do it with any of those things, then you need to go talk to somebody, you need to go find resources, or you need to not hunt, right? But to come in as a compound bow hunter and be like, you use a crossbow? What a loser, you know? You be a man, use a compound bow. I use both. I feel just as much pride shooting a deer with a crossbow as I do a compound bow because I'm not taking long shots, I'm not cheating, I'm not using it to some grand advantage or anything like that. It's just another way to make sure that I am ethically harvesting an animal as responsibly as I can. And I am making sure that animal suffers as little as possible, right? And if that's not your number one priority, if it's pride, if it's ego, if it's looking the part, you should not. You should not. If you're gonna use this, you need to be putting, you know, hours into practice, hours and hours, weeks, for, you know, months leading up to the season. That's what you should do because it is marginal. It is a developed skill. It's muscle memory. That's what goes into that, and that's beautiful. And it's really impressive. The guys that do that. There's much more impressive and badass guys that do it a lot and are very famous for doing it. And that's awesome. And I think that should always be everybody's goal is a pursuit and a connection like that. If you can't achieve it, don't feel shame. Hunt with crossbow, use ethical standards, set reasonable fair chase limitations for yourself and say, I'm not going to shoot a deer that doesn't come within this range. I'm not going to use this in excess. You know, there's rifles that shoot 700-800 yards. If you're shooting 700-800 yards, your bullet's flying for a couple seconds. That deer could walk and get popped in the stomach, but you want to be impressive with your distance. Don't do that. Don't do that. Use fair chase standards and close the gap, close the distance, get closer to the animals. That is the challenge of hunting. From everything I've seen and everything I've studied and everything I've read about previous generations of hunters, you know, the challenge isn't making accurate shots. That should be a given. The challenge is getting close to the animals and guaranteeing that kill, right? If the challenge for you is, I wonder if I'm actually going to be able to make this shot, let me push myself to the limits of my abilities at the risk of wounding and hurting this animal, that is unethical. That is not fair chase. But if you are going to push your abilities and your standards by trying to get as close to the animals as possible, but then when you finally pull the trigger, you know, it's a guarantee, it's a slam dunk. You know that it's going to work, whether you're using this or this. That should be your goal. That should be the right thing. And I think that elitism and that anger that a lot of people have when they come from the compound group and they attack the crossbow group is they don't see maybe the same level of commitment. They don't see they maybe see these guys as kind of like cheating and not putting the time in. And at the end of the day, don't be elitist. There's very few people who hunt anymore these days, and there's a lot of deer. You know, be welcoming, be encouraging, and you know what? Pick up a crossbow and hunt with it. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with either one of these weapon systems if you know them and if you're effective with them. If you are not effective with one of them, you need to be able to recognize that, say that you aren't, and then find a solution to that problem. And you know, if you're a crossbow hunter and you're taking 100-yard shots, you need to, you know, take a solid look at yourself and be like, why? Why can't I challenge myself and, you know, try and close the distance with these animals? Why does the challenge have to always be the farthest shot? Because that's the least ethical, right? The challenge should be the closest shot. How close can I get? And that's regardless of weapon systems. So blow up the video with the comments and tell me how I'm dead wrong and guys who hunt with crossbows are absolute wusses and guys who hunt with compound bows are absolute chads, or blow it up if you're a crossbow guy and be like, those compound bow hunters are losers and elitists and, you know, irresponsible and wounding deer and, you know, whatever makes you happy. Blow it up and do it. And, you know, just understand that, like, guys, at the end of the day, as long as you're hunting in a way that is respectful to the animals and not making them suffer, you know, that's the most important thing. And then you're using as much of that animal as possible, so that it doesn't go to waste. Yeah, we're gonna get some hunting videos in the near future. Probably gonna involve this crossbow for a little bit of it, and then we'll go into muzzleloader, and then we'll go to rifle, and then we'll do the elk hunt, which is rifle cow elk hunt, at the end of December. So stick around, hit like, follow, comment, you know, do all the things, and thank you guys so much for watching. And you know, just be ethical, practice fair chase, and I'll see you guys next time.